Okay, this is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Wysteria Edwards for the first time on the Fam Electric Ghost program. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's fun to be here.
Want to let people know that we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You see that scrolling below. If you use the coupon code GHOST to get 1 month free premium subscription, we will be on Newsly later tonight. So you'll be able to listen to us there. It's an audio only version of a podcast platform. But thank you again for being on the program. It's
Absolutely.
always great to have new people every week or every day. So thank you.
You're absolutely welcome. It's my pleasure.
So we're at episode 954 of the
Wow.
Family Electric Ghost podcast. So tracking that since 2016 on Apple Podcast. So we're getting closer to our episode 1000, and that's one thing we've been doing this because we love to talk to people from around the world. That's kind of our thing. But we've got your website up here,
hmm
wisteriaedwards.com. For those of you who are only listening, that will be clickable on the published website of the podcast. But if people click that, what would they find there right now?
What would they find there? Well, I have worn many hats. I like to say that I am an author, an educator, an influencer, and recently actually became the owner of an LLC company, Simple and Deep, which actually helps women understand attachment and engage their stories, their personal stories of harm and heartache, and what makes us who we are, right? We are a whole story. And then also how they can live intentionally. So, and then I currently teach kindergarten in Southeast Washington, right on the border of Oregon. So I wear many hats. I've also worked as a playwright. And so all of those things kind of go together. So you'll see when you get to the website, and I can explain it again later, but you can take a quiz on your attachment styles. You can take a look at the new book that I'm publishing, Waiting for Mr. Rogers. You can listen to my own podcast. And just see the different resources that I have available there, as well as blogging and all those kind of things. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop for all the different things that I do.
That's awesome. We like to let the listeners know that that the websites that we put up, the URLs, will help people get a deeper picture of the guest that we're talking to. We get to talk to you for an hour, but that
Right,
gives people the follow up to dive into everything that our guest has to offer. So
right,
one of the other
right.
things we have today is the topic we were going to get into. How can I repair what I've already messed up with my children? Um,
Absolutely.
so,
So taking away from that,
so we wanted to get that
I
out there.
yeah, it's a big topic, right? It's like, oh, solve this problem in 1 hour. So here I go. Actually, really, my work with attachment, which is how we give and receive love, came from my own brokenness, my own um, discovery of behavioral addictions, love and sex addiction, wanting to know why I actually tethered to people that were unsafe for me or emotionally unavailable or abusive. And oftentimes we will keep tethering to these people and we're like, why do I keep dating them? Or why did I marry so many people that are different people that ended up being abusive to me? And what happens is, as we look into our own story, we'll see that we actually have what they call insecure attachment from childhood. So through my own journey, of looking at what put me in therapy after 12 years of being just feeling like I was running from my life and my own children. I have two boys. I learned about insecure attachment. And so, yes, there's guilt about what I didn't know, but what's so beautiful about it is that our brain, we've learned in recent studies and in this last, half of the decades, is that or the century, is that basically our brain is plastic. We can repair our brain. The neural pathways can be reconnected and reestablished. And so the cool thing about that is that even if we have insecure attachment, we can gain secure attachment. So that, alongside having a little boy that entered my classroom that was absolutely a mess, my 15th year of teaching, who I call Blue Eyes because I try to keep his anonymity, he changed my life because I was looking for something I thought this kid is going to take me out. Like I had moved to a different school because I thought, okay, now I can kind of work on my own healing. And because I was working in like 100% poverty before. And so that was kind of giving me some secondary trauma where I was absolutely dead set that it was my kids and I against the world, whoever I was teaching. So I was clothing them, feeding them, giving everything they needed, spending myself into an oblivion over, dry shampoo, making sure they had everything they needed. In the same sense, I was kind of starting to abuse myself with my job because there was just no end to the need. And so I moved to this new school, and then this little boy was going to take me out. And so the whole journey ended up becoming something where I started applying what I was learning in my own life about how to repair attachment to the children I was teaching, especially him. But in my deepest desperation, I was like, I don't know what to do with him. So I went on YouTube and I looked up Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Cran episode, because I knew that when I was growing up, I had Mr. Rogers. And I thought, well, I know I can trust him. So and I also remembered the Cran episode, which a lot of us remember from the 80s. And so I found it and I just decided we're going to watch Mr. Rogers because I literally don't know what to do with this kid. And magical, amazing things started to happen where it literally started to rewire the brains of children. And so fast forward into that year, by the end of the next year, I was able to actually enter the Fred Rogers archive that he left upon his death and read his personal papers. And so that became the basis of my book that I'm releasing. And it's really not just for teachers, but it's for caregivers and for parents, but also so important, the children we once were, because to heal our insecure attachments, we have to go back and think about the child we were. And that's how we actually can repair the things that we felt like we messed up with our own children. I was able to go back to my children and say, whoa, I had no idea I was passing this junk on to you. So how we
Yeah.
are parented, we actually give to our children. It's called intergenerational trauma. So what we don't heal gets revealed in our behaviors, right? So that has been the best thing that's ever happened to me and game changing because I was able to go back and reestablish secure relationships with my children. So the best way to repair things with children, if we feel like we've messed up, is to study our own story and recognize where we need to heal and go to work on that rigorously without like with fervor and vigor, because of the fact that I think I just invented a word in the middle of there, but it's the idea, like we go after it wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And it's going to be the hardest thing we ever do. But I tried to, in this book, create a roadmap for anybody that wants to know, what does a child actually need to be secure? And so that's the basis of all of my work. So when we talked about the quiz on my website, that is a 60-second quiz you can take. You could take it right now while you're listening to me dribble. And the great thing about it is that it gives you a customized report right away, so that, and it looks just at, before we get really complicated, you notice like as adults, we get better at hiding things, better at being distracted. But as children, it can be pretty simple to peg what kind of attachment styles they have when they walk into my classroom. So I'm receiving children next week. Many of them. I met them the other night. And the thing is that I could tell even when they walk into my classroom what I'm probably dealing with. So that's been the kind of the wholehearted part of it. But yeah, so Mr. Rogers was right all along. He was trained in attachment right at the very beginning when they learned about it. And now we've proven that he was right all along by scanning people's brains, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm a child of the 70s. I grew up with like, Zoom, Sesame Street, Mr.
Yeah.
Rogers,
Yeah.
probably Captain Kangaroo too.
Of course. Yeah,
Romper Room,
absolutely.
all those.
Yeah. And what was so great
And
about it is just recently, they did the movie with Tom Hanks, but the one that I absolutely love is a documentary that was put out by Morgan Neville, which is called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And if anybody really wants to know about how intentional Fred Rogers was, they should see that. It's full of people that I met and love, but it also shows just the amount of work he put into being absolutely precious and careful with everything he did for children, to make sure that he always said the truth, that he never misled. and all of those kind of elements that made him who he was. But also he modeled what secure attachment would look like if someone were sitting down with you, talking to you as a child. And so that's what I've used kind of to partner with me in my own teaching. And it's literally changed my life and the way I look and listen to children. And it also is why I founded my company, because it's one of those things where we look for these really shallow and complex answers, and we're trying to treat symptoms. But now we know that all adversity comes from the beginning of our first wounds, which is brokenness, broken
Hmm.
connection, right? And then we look for solutions to either make us not feel like we're broken or
Yeah.
give us false connection. Think about social
Yeah.
media. My God, isn't that like
Yeah.
like
It's
it's such
very
a
fake.
false connection? Yeah.
Well, it's like,
So,
well, the whole, yeah, it's very, if you think about the kids today
right.
being kind of bullied into thinking that these internet, out there, the personalities are out there, these, what they call influencers.
Yes.
They've
Yes.
all got these,
Influencers.
like, kind of like these, false kinda ideals.
Yeah.
Like, they're making
Absolutely.
kids have their get weight conscious before they should. Think
Yes.
that there's only one pattern for beauty. And
Yes.
it's
Yes.
very dangerous to get young teenagers into, they could get into eating disorders, they could get into, bad, addiction because they're trying to get to this, kind of unattainable thing these people are representing, kind of not the
Right.
real picture, like the opposite of Mr. Rogers. Like I grew up,
Correct.
with
Correct.
like 4 TV channels, not
I
like
know.
1,000.
And a
No,
cord that
no,
had like on our phone. I know. So what's
no
funny about
smartphone.
this. Yes, exactly. And the thing that it came through, like I had another little boy that was just out of control, but it was more about like me as we go back and revisit these places that we were broken as children. I want to be very clear that what I talk about more, I do have a whole section in there on trauma, but what we view as trauma is not the whole thing. So what I really believe is important that we define is what is developmental trauma. So it's not
Mm,
just the, what people would say, oh, PTSD because I was there at 9/11, or I went into combat, or we had this big, a mass shooting or whatever, what people would think is traumatic, which it is. But
mhm,
I'm talking about developmental trauma. So it's for a prolonged amount of time, and it affects not only just how a child sees the world, but how they view themselves. And it is through continual um, being ostracized, abandoned, belittled,
mm,
demeaned, dismissed by a parent. And one of what
yeah,
happens is it's the little things that people would often say weren't a big deal. Like, oh, well, he's a kid, he'll get over it. Or they're so little, they don't remember it. And now
yeah,
we know that trauma is stored in our body, it's stored in our senses, it's stored in our beliefs about ourselves. And so that is what developmental trauma is, but it's also where we didn't get enough of the good things that we needed. So, like you said, like people, like they don't have someone coming alongside them and saying, that's actually just because they're saying it on the internet doesn't make it true. Did you know that?
yeah.
Or you need to ask yourself what you really believe. Like they don't have what we would call like the wise adult or the Jiminy Cricket, the conscience that's like telling them, hey, you might want to be careful about spending so much time in that place because I see that it's changing you. Or and so we call it, it's children need an empathetic witness to whatever story they're
Mhm,
in. So for instance, I went through COVID teaching 5-year-olds on a screen. And the thing that I did the most was, one, I did never stop showing Mr. Rogers. We watched it every day. I just shared my screen. We watched it. Sometimes I'd come back and some of them were asleep, but all of them were there. And the biggest thing that I made sure they knew through the entire pandemic was the people that love you are going to keep you safe. You don't have to worry about COVID. It's an adult problem. And two, I love you. And I will be here when you come back to school. And we're going to get through it together. Right? Just like Fred does at the end of every episode, he says, I'll be back when the day is new and I'll have more ideas for you. I will come back.
mhm,
So it's that idea that children need to know that adults come back, that adults love them, that they're going to keep them safe. And so many of us as children with insecure or broken connection and attachment, learned as babies that people were not trustworthy. They were either going
Mhm.
to hurt us, they were going to ignore us, or they were going to leave us. And so what happens is that we keep trying to figure that out our whole life. And so my goal is to create and foster what we felt as children, that feeling of safety, or that feeling of that the world wasn't so complex, right? Like, I think that was what I was trying to get back, just even going back to the crayon episode. Like, okay, here's Mr. Rogers. I know it's like the 1980s. Reagan is president. Like, the things that I remember from being a child, and how kind of trying to like chase after that innocence, or like that less complex world. And so that's what I try to foster in my classroom, is less busyness, less technology, not for just to do it just because it's there, but like, and my children didn't know how to play when they were coming to
Yeah.
kindergarten. They didn't have any imagination whatsoever. They think everything is a smartphone that they can swipe. They don't know how to hold a crayon. They don't know how to sit in a chair and listen to a
Yeah.
story. We have taken, by trying to be distracted or trying to entertain children, we've literally stolen their childhood. There is no more innocence. Like, the things they're wanting me to teach young children are things that we didn't even think about learning until we were in high school. And now we're just making it more and more about stealing childhood, like stealing the ability to imagine that a paper plate is the steering wheel of a car, or that um
Yeah.
yeah, like making up an animal, or being silly on purpose, right? So that is another thing that is so important, that I feel like our world has lost the ability to play well with each other. Like, to get
Yeah. I
along,
mean,
to,
yeah.
yeah,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
as a kid, I'm a child of the 70s, I'm 55, and I grew up with wood blocks, Legos, erector sets.
Didn't you go outside and get
So I had
dirty?
to build my
You
own
remember, like,
worlds.
yeah,
And
and do you remember, like,
yeah,
coming in
well, I
because
mean,
you played
I had
so
Tonka,
freaking hard? Yeah, yeah,
yeah, we had
and
Tonka toys.
yeah,
Tonka toys,
and
which were
sandboxes,
like,
and, like,
earth excavators, and we go out to a little sand pit, and then we kind of pretend that we were building things. And it was a lot of the world was not video games. It was all like
no.
we made up our own worlds. We went
Yes,
outside and we created things with our Tonka toys. We played wiffle ball or badminton. Uh, you know, we had
kickball.
like
Yeah,
racing car sets where they actually played and had to put things together and work on the cars. And so there was a lot of creativity, a lot of learning how to fix things, learn how to jury rig things, and know how to
or take
discover
things
things. And it
apart.
wasn't all kind of
Yeah,
wasn't pre-planned. We
no,
we had to create our
yeah,
own worlds with whatever
right.
we got.
Right. And I think what I noticed when we started watching Fred consistently, and like everybody's like, oh, isn't it great that they're doing Daniel Tiger, which is like an animated? I'm like, well, one, it's confusing because they made Daniel Tiger like Mr. Rogers, and that's weird. And then like, I'm like, and I miss him. Like, it's so important that children see a grown man who can actually attune to them and isn't going to be a creep, because we've made all grown men that might be
Also,
interested in children
yeah,
pedophiles, which they're not. But the thing
the
is
creeps.
that
Yeah,
we have made,
yeah.
yes, like, so anytime someone's like, oh, that guy is my neighbor and he wants to come over and talk to us, he must be up to something. Like, we become so suspicious and so terrified. So there's this criminologist called Gavin
Mhm.
DeBecker, and he wrote this book years ago called The Gift of Fear. And he says that we spend so much time worrying about things that will never happen that we actually cancel out what we have is real fear to protect us. For instance, he said, we worry that a child is going to be kidnapped by someone they don't know, which, after working on a play about missing and endangered children, it's 1% of all children who are actually abducted by a stranger. It's always someone they kind of know, or a parent, right? But we don't heed
Yeah,
the
yeah. It's the
fear we
opposite of what they think.
feel. Right. We don't heed the fear that we feel with the guy that gives us the creeps at the daycare. We cancel it out. We are like, oh, it's not a big deal. Instead, we worry so much about these people that don't exist that are going to take our children. So it's like we have to we have to
Yeah.
think back to what is real, what matters. So here's the deal. Fred Rogers said the insides of children have not changed. The world around them has, which means that what you needed in the 70s, I needed in the 80s, someone else needed in the 90s, and now a child needs right now. But we have tried to say that's different just because we know more that children need something different. No. Like, it's really about being what? Seen, heard, known, felt. Someone sits beside me, enters an experience with me, doesn't take it on. But when I'm having a hard day and someone sits beside me and just sits there, that is powerful. We've stopped being silent. We're afraid of it, right?
Mhm.
And so there's countless moments where Fred just lets it be completely still and silent. And so I started doing that in the classroom. Like they'd be like, what do I do next? And I'd be like, sit there. And they look at me like, what?
Yeah. And
Entertain
sometimes you
me. And
have
I'm
to,
like, I'm not a freaking circus clown. You need to be able to sit there and just be okay. Like, like breathe.
yeah.
Like, and I'll deliberately
It's kind of
just,
like
or
a
if I'm,
meditation. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I
And
think a lot of
people,
people have forgot
yeah,
about the silence. They're trying to fill up every moment. And if you fill up every moment, you don't give time for reflection. And a part of learning is you gotta have a little space, so you
yeah.
can't be constantly engaged. But
It
because of
actually,
this kind of
yeah.
smartphone, computer, babysitter world, people aren't given the space to have the imagination to process what
Mm,
they just learned. They just keep on
yeah.
getting overloaded with new things. And then how much
Right.
of it
And
are they retaining, or are they getting too
oh,
much
I
of it
know.
at once?
I know. And we work on growing our brains, but we also in kindergarten work on growing on the inside. And and understanding that emotions are not bad or good. They just are. And when they show up, and so Fred was the catalyst at that whole, crossroads where up until that point, they really just hadn't looked at the late 60s when he finally started doing his work in child development. They really hadn't looked into the emotional world of a child, right? We were in a place where it was kind of this Victorian kind of a different way of looking at it, where it was like a child didn't really develop until a certain age. And so he was like, he met this little boy during his research and his studying that said, this little boy, he was watching this little boy talk to, I think it was a doctor. I can't exactly remember, but he said, well, what do you do with the mad that you feel when you feel so mad you can bite? And Fred was just like blown away by that, which became the beginning words to his song, What Do You Do with the Mad That You Feel? Because he was like, that is so primal. Like, I
Mhm,
want to bite you. I'm so pissed. Right. So he was like, whoa. I mean, like, but yeah, so now here's a child with all these extreme feelings inside, and no one's guiding them. We just leave kids. So I was the child that if I was
mhm,
falling apart, dysregulating, so my nervous system is through the roof, my mom couldn't handle it. She would jump into the chaos with me, or she would put me in my room and I'd have to scream until I fell asleep, right? But that's terrifying as a child because you don't have the capability to really regulate yourself. That's why babies cry. We pick them up and we soothe them. So it's the same idea that in
mhm,
kindergarten, for instance, they need someone to. That's why COVID killed me, by the way, because they were like, "Don't touch them," and I'm like, "Are you freaking kidding me? Like, I have to touch them to soothe them, right?" They fell down.
mhm,
Like, oh, sorry, I'm gonna get too close with my mask. Like it did. It was awful. Anyways, I digress. But it's the idea that like I they need someone to come alongside and say, oh my gosh, that's so huge. I can see that matters so much. And it's okay to be angry about that, like, and validating it, witnessing the moment with them. It doesn't mean that we're telling them, and it's totally fine that you're out of control. No, I mean, we can talk about that, but if they have flipped their lid, so to speak, and all of their cognitive reasoning is gone, because what do we act like when we're super ticked off? Children, right? Because our brain has like all
mhm,
cognitive ability has flipped. So it's the same thing with the child. We don't try to reason with ourselves, really. We can't even reason when we're really upset. So we just need someone to sit there and rub our back or just sit with us and tell us it's okay. And when you're ready, I'll be right here. And so a lot of that has just been helping my children that I work with understand that. And My husband said the other night, he was with me for back to school night, and he said, what I love the most about watching you as a teacher, and we've been married 25 years, but he said, I love not just to watch you receive new children, but I love to watch all of the children at all the different grades. They all come back to you. And the reason is because they
Mhm.
know that no matter what, they are loved. I disciplined those kids. Like they were like, I'd be like, like, but we also talk about that discipline is love. It's loving to tell someone no. It's loving, which, oh man, people don't like it when you tell their kids no,
Yeah, you have to
right?
have guidance. You have to have
Yeah.
guidance. Well, you get some parents today that don't want any kind of controls on their kids, and it's like there's
Yeah.
certain norms that have to like within civic society or civil
Yeah.
society. You can't have
Right.
somebody just getting bent out of control to the point where they hurt other kids, right?
Well,
So
and
you
that's the
have to
thing
have some
too.
kind of
Yeah.
at
It's
some
so
point you have
funny.
to have some level of control, you
I
know,
know. I know. And
because
you know
it
what's
can't be out of
interesting?
control all day.
Right, and I dare any of those people, I kid you not, I will let them come into my classroom, but before they get there, I will feed my kids cupcakes and then lock the door, and they can deal with all those children. Because let me tell you, um, people would be amazed at how their children actually act in a different setting with other children. And also, when entitlement shows up in the classroom, it's the first thing I nip because I'm like, you know what? It's not about me. It's about, and then they'll eventually say we. Like I just nip that crap quick because I'm like, you know what? The
Mhm.
world does not revolve around one person. And I always say, if you cut in line for cupcakes in New York, that would be a big deal. like there's places you don't cut in line,
Yeah, it's a
Mr.
big
or
deal.
Miss Ma'am. So it's the idea like it's more
You
about
can't do it. You can't
yeah,
do it.
like I'm like, oh, can you imagine? Like certain places in Manhattan, I'm like, you might die. Like I don't tell kids that, but they're like there's places
That's not
where
gonna happen.
yeah, like but it's more about we have become so incredibly self-centered as as a world, right? So it's really about teaching children
Mhm.
with Fred's help, and that's what I've done. I've started to go back to um those little adages that he gives where it's like, uh what we want to give to the world and how we help other people. And it's these universal truths. And he was an ordained minister, a Presbyterian minister, but he was ordained to serve children on TV. So, and what's so beautiful about his faith is that he
Mhm.
made it universal. He didn't want children to ever be excluded if they were Buddhist or Muslim or whatever. He wanted children to know that they were loved and that they were seen as
Yeah.
infinitely beautiful and absolutely perfect the way that they were, regardless of race, gender, any of it. So he opted to never use the word God and use the word love,
It's very
which is,
inclusion, yeah. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And so and I love that. And
very
so I will, yeah,
very progressive.
radical, super radical. And what's funny about it is now people are like, oh, it's so old fashioned. And I'm like, but you don't understand. He was so radical to do that. Right.
It was
And the thing is,
radical.
yeah. And so now what I tell my children is I say to them before we ever start Mr. Rogers, one, I do not multitask as an educator. I sit down in a chair with them and I model to them how to watch with intention, to watch with purpose, to watch with wonder and curiosity.
Mhm.
We don't talk, we don't go potty, we don't get a drink. They get to lay down and snuggle if they want, but they also, I pull these lucky duck sticks, is what I call them. They all have a number. And I pull it, and then those kids get to sit on both sides of me. They flank me, and then the place right at my knees I call it the hot spot. And usually it's the child. Well, for instance, it was the little blue-eyed boy when I first started watching Mr. Rogers. He was there every day because he needed it. And I think about that's like the best attunement spot. So to attune is to enter on purpose the emotional situation or experience of another human being. So thinking about it like not only I'm going to pull up a chair beside you, but I'm going to take my shoes off. Because what do we know when someone takes off their shoes and then maybe they sit crisscross applesauce on the couch they're sitting on? They're there for a while. Like they're going to take a spot and they're not going anywhere. And that's how we want children to
Mhm.
feel when they are near us. That we took off our shoes and we're going to stay put. Like no big feelings you have are ever going to make me go away.
Yeah,
I'm here
not
I'm here for you
distracted.
no matter what. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I do a lot.
you don't
Yeah.
want to be
I
so
do a lot of
distracted.
fetching. I'm sorry, what? I didn't hear what you said. What was that?
Well, I think some people are so they're so distracted, you know,
Yes.
the adults are not fully paying attention to kids.
That's
It's
why I
like
put
an
my phone down.
afterthought
Yeah.
because they're on their phone or they got their
Mhm.
beeper or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, you just dated yourself with a beeper. I don't know if people still have
So I
beepers, dude.
totally
But it's
yeah,
the idea that
yeah, well,
yes,
it's
it's
the
so
same idea.
yeah, you get it. Yeah. But the thing is, it is hard. And um my mentor challenged me before I really started doing this with Mr. Rogers every day. She said, please do me a favor, because she also knew that I was really stressed out with what was going on with him and what I was coming out of with secondary trauma from my other job at the other school. She said, please allow yourself to receive what love has to teach you with Mr. Rogers. And so I took that challenge and said, okay. And as soon as I did that, amazing things started to happen, not only for the children I was teaching, like they started to become more creative. They started to want to make things. They made puppets, they made puppet stages. Whatever they saw Fred do, they wanted to try it. So they made homemade instruments. All of a sudden, my parents were like, one, they're asking to watch Mr. Rogers on YouTube. Two, they're wanting my trash. And I'm like, give it to them. Like, let them make whatever they want, right? Like now they're thinking, like now they're not just thinking that they need a car, they can make a car. So like all of a sudden they started to have imagination, they started to make believe, they were starting to reenact Mr. Rogers with puppets in the classroom. It's so small of the amount of time it took to get their childhood back. And they started making connections. They started being kinder. They started to understand empathy. They started to, and yes, even the little blue eyed boy, he tried to like, well, what if I think Mr. Rogers is for babies? And I was like, and then my own therapist was like, just tell him it's okay. And I'm like, oh my God. Like it was so hard because he was such a jerk. Right. But I was like, so I said, okay, but he'd been so deeply traumatized by
Mhm.
his own upbringing that he was very disorganized. So disorganized children is the worst case scenario when it comes to, like, we see a lot of this with foster children that have been growing up in a very, very violent or chaotic environment, right? So we're seeing that because the baby is either being terrorized by their caregiver or they're watching their caregiver be terrorized by someone else. So we're seeing this a lot with children that grow up with extreme domestic violence in the home, right? So they end up with things like reactive attachment disorder. Like as soon as I attach, I have to unattach because it's terrifying to me. So like they have no idea what to do. So they'll bounce between an avoidant child that's going to not make any noise. So we think, oh my gosh, this child's so well behaved. No, they're terrified to make a mistake. Do you know any perfectionists, perhaps? They often are avoidantly attached people because they
Mhm.
learned that to survive, this is what I have to do. But if they're about to make a mistake, watch a perfectionist implode. They will fall apart. They will be the ones that are medicated. They're trying everything to stay, you know whereas an anxious attached person is constantly checking in with you. Are we okay? Like, we're okay, right? They're texting you a lot, they're in your space. Children are the same way. So this little boy would jump between both of those. So one day things would be working really well, and then the next day he was telling me to F off. And you're like, I don't understand. Like, why? But the thing is that because he
Mhm.
doesn't know if I'm safe, right? And so this was our dance that we did for the entire year. I mean, it was just brutal. Then we went into COVID for his first grade year. And so it was like several years in a row. But now I can say, I don't want to give away the book. But the thing is that it's like, he comes now, like he came back
Mhm.
as a fifth grader just the other night to back to school night because he's going to be like, this is his last year in the building. But he came down in the middle of all those little kindergartners and hugged me, and I was like, okay, so what is your schedule like, do you think? And he goes, well, I'm going to get it and then we'll figure it out. And so he knows that he's going to find at least one time during the school day where he's going to come and connect with me. And all I do is I just, I'll snuggle him, rub his back. Sometimes he'll just walk in and just be like, sit in front of me or sit beside me while I'm doing stuff on the computer. And if he sees that it's something he can help with, he'll just take it over and start doing it because he knows that I'm his safe place. So whenever a child finally
Mhm.
shows you who their safe person is, you continue to cultivate that. and you allow them and like access to that person. And that's what I would love to see happen in education. Like our PE teacher is amazing. And I just feel like he has been so one of those people that's like, yeah, no, have them come down to PE and they can help me. He's always willing to like let children come in and just be with him to be love. Right. And so I think that we have a lot of things backwards in education because we don't have the emphasis of first, it takes a child being emotionally well before they can learn, but it also means that an educator and a parent also has to be emotionally well to really pay attention the way that they need to a child. So, and get this crazy statistic. Only 50% of the time do we have to get it right for a person to be secure. So that means we really had some people botching it. Like there was a lot of botching if
Mhm.
people are insecure. 50% of the time. Like it's really quite a big number. But what's beautiful is it can be
Well,
repaired,
I think,
right? Yeah.
but yeah, I think a lot of parents don't realize, like you said, they probably still got the Victorian point of view, um, where they're not thinking that they need to put any kind of emotional effort because they're kind of doing this top down. I'm the elder, I'm the
Mhm.
father, I'm the mother. You should just do what I say, whether
Do
to
what I
do what I
say. Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
and
Even though
give
they
them
knew that they
bad
sucked.
examples. Say,
Yeah.
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 I mean,
Or
they
you
do
knew
things
that
like
your childhood
if you give
sucked, but
some,
you're like, "Oh, yeah. Yeah, I get it."
yeah,
Yeah,
if you give
absolutely.
a kid like you're never gonna amount to nothing, or I
Mm-mm.
wish I never had you, and you say, well, they're gonna forget that. They don't forget that.
No,
What
they
I find
don't.
is adults, I'm a musician, I'm a producer. A lot of singer-songwriters, the reason they can write is they have that inner child pain and they remember what their parent told them. And they spend
Yes,
their whole life trying to prove that they can do it. Right. So I
yes.
deal with artists who are using music or art as a cathartic thing to solve that inner child pain.
Pain.
And
Yes.
they use the art therapy to do it being a creator, but
Right,
some people they don't have art therapy. They don't know what to do.
right. They don't know what to
And
do,
they
and
have no
yeah,
release.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And that is part of what I do for my company as it's developing is really giving women lots of tools to go back and revisit these places and recognize that our life is a story, right? We study everything but our own story. Think about if you're, for music producing, if you get a new software system or whatever, you're going to have to go and explore that and study it and figure out how am I going to use this to mix or how am I going to, right? You don't just, I mean, you might fiddle fart. You're a dude. So I would assume that most dudes just start like digging around. They rarely read the manual, but I'm saying most of the time when we get something
Just
new, we need to
use
study it.
it.
I'm going to be really like super generic and
Yeah.
kind of go
You
there.
should read it.
And you're
I read
smiling.
some manuals.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
if I wanna
Good.
know how to do it, then I read a manual.
Right. Right, but I can't tell you how many times my scientist literal husband has gone I'm like, "Have you even read how to do it?" And he's like, "Well, no." And I'm like, okay." But, it's the idea that that, like, we study everything, but we don't study our own story. We don't look back at who the child that we were to understand the person we are. We think that's in the past. It's not. It is influencing every decision we make, every word we write, everything. It's always there. It's the things we hear ourselves saying to ourselves, right? So, and I'm not sitting here saying, oh my gosh, I've arrived. What I'm saying is it is a lifelong process of rediscovering and asking ourselves questions. And I didn't even recognize why I'd become a teacher until I studied my own story and found that the answers were from a story when I was 9. So it's really interesting as we go back and do that, that we are able to go back and what we call reparent ourselves, give ourselves the attunement we needed, like asking the questions like, why did that happen? Or voicing and naming like that was abuse. Just saying it to ourselves, like that wasn't okay that happened. And some of us are like, oh my gosh, I could never say that to my parents. Well, maybe you don't need to, but maybe you need to say it for yourself. Maybe you need to write it out and write that story out because it's so good
Mhm.
for our brain, right? That's why it's cathartic when people write out songs dealing with it because of the fact that they're writing it out. There is so much power with our brain to write something down. We write it out. Journaling saved my life. During recovery, I filled probably 40, 45 journals full of whatever I needed to say to myself. It wasn't for anybody else but me. But we even think that's selfish sometimes. So it's a matter of deciding, I don't want to lug this crap around anymore. Right. And what's crazy about crap is it actually
Mhm.
does help us feel connected to other people once we talk about it, believe it or not. But we have to understand, and what's crazy is as we look back, we can see like contours and themes. So I recognized that I was a truth teller. Like I was someone who could go into a situation and go, what is that? And of course, it's got me in a lot of
Mhm.
trouble. And it's also got me thrown out of a lot of groups. But now I recognize that's kind of the makeup of who I am. And it makes me uniquely me,
Yeah.
right? Like if someone said to you, why are you a music producer? Why does that matter? Like you could probably go back to parts of your story and tell them why. And it's through story that we heal. It's through things like Fred telling a story with puppets that drew children in so they could learn about things that really mattered in life. Like, how are you being a friend? How are you thinking about other people? How are you going to make this world better? Right? That is, and that's why the reason that this book was written was
Yeah.
truly yeah, to celebrate that. Like I'm just trying to help people know this is the roadmap of what I had to do to really engage my own children and my own story. So hopefully someone will be kind of set free
I think it was,
emotionally.
yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think it was really important with Mr. Rogers about when he used to talk about like "Be My Neighbor,"
Yeah.
the whole "Be My Neighbor" song.
Yeah.
Would
Won't you
you
be my
could be.
neighbor?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think because a lot of people don't think that way. Yeah, they don't think that way anymore. Everybody is so individualistic. They don't think
Mm.
about being a good neighbor.
Like, do you know your
They think
neighbors?
about like, well,
Do you
like
feel
I'm good.
yeah. Do you
Yeah,
really know
I
your
actually know
neighbors
my
right now?
neighbors,
Do you know your
but it's
neighbors?
like
Like, there
I
are
know
people on my
yeah,
cul-de-sac
well,
right
yeah,
now I
well,
do not
maybe.
know. Like, but and then if someone came over and
Yeah.
they're like, "I
Well,
just
I
live
mean, I
next
kinda
door."
I came into a
Right. Right, but that's the thing
well, we
is
have a
we are
homeowners association, so we have, like, meetings and stuff, but
oh my. Like, but that's like kind of like the club that you pay for. So those are like built-in friends, right? Like I don't know, but at least
yeah,
you have to meet people. But I
yeah,
mean, I
yeah.
guess so. You're back east, but I don't know if anybody's ever been to places like Latrobe, Pennsylvania, where Mr. Rogers came from, and that's actually where the archive is at St. Vincent College. But Latrobe, if you're in downtown Main Street, Latrobe, the houses are literally like right on top of each other, right? You wouldn't not know your neighbors.
Mm.
And that is what he based the neighborhood on. The
Oh,
model that we saw at the beginning,
that's what he was
he
doing.
based it on his ideal of growing up in a small town where people really knew each other. His parents were philanthropists. His mother came from a considerable amount of wealth, and they were some of the richest families in Pennsylvania. Okay, so the depression didn't even touch these people. That tells you something. So he went to school in a
Oh.
limousine, and he
Mhm.
was like he was set apart because they wanted so desperately to protect him. But on the same set of the other side, his parents gave so much back to that town, right? His dad used to talk about they would put pennies on the windowsill for people to find, and just like little things that they did. His mom always made sure that the doctors had nice neckties at the hospital, or all these different things. But it was like they knew their people in their town. Like Fred remembers giving away thousands and thousands of dollars worth of Christmas gifts to the people that ran different companies and different factories, and they took really good care of the people around them, and they knew people. And I just think there was something really beautiful about, for me, knowing that there was this Swedish older man across the street growing up that was one of my dad's best friends, and he was a welder. And the smell of him welding, and that just seeing like those sparks coming out of his garage. And I knew when in the 80s, everybody started going back to work, the moms did, and we became latchkey kids, right? So I knew though that if I needed something, I could go to Ralph. I could go to Mrs. Sprouse, who was my neighbor. Yes, they were elderly, but they would always take care of me. And we have lost that sense of, I know these people, they are my safe people. They will always take care of me. They will always be there. And that's what we have to start being for each other. We learned during COVID that we are very lonely people. Amazon did very well, I'm sure, but but it's the idea, like, we missed people, we missed interaction. How about when we couldn't see people's faces? It was a huge deal. So we need interaction, and we need people that authentically look and see us.
Yeah, it's definitely, human interaction is super important. Musicians, we find this, because we have to perform in front of crowds,
Mhm.
and we kind of live for that interaction. I knew
And
a
it was
lot of
gone.
musicians during COVID that had a
Oh,
hard time
but we got
becoming
creative.
being
We
creative.
got creative.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
they got creative, but there's certain types of musicians had a hard time without having a crowd. They could do as much as they
Yeah.
could inside their home studio, but a lot of times they what their the creation process was kind of on the road. When they were in the middle of doing a tour, they would get ideas on stage, right? And when
Right.
you don't have that stage with the crowd to try new ideas on and see them instant, as an artist, a musician, one of the cool things is, unlike an author, is you can see immediate reaction to your new idea.
Mhm.
When you put
Yeah.
something out in front of a crowd, immediately you can get an reaction to whether they like it or they don't. And
It's the
that in
reason
the
that I
feedback and yeah.
Absolutely. It's the reason when I was performing, I've done both TV and live theater, and I would always choose live theater over TV because I loved the sound of people breathing in the same space that I was performing. And they think they're watching a movie. It's hilarious. Like, they don't, the first row, even people on Broadway, like, I think people forget that we can hear you when we're on stage. Like, we can hear your cracker, like you're rapping, and we can hear you whispering to one another, and your reactions. And but there's such energy with live theater or live crowds. And I was also a singer growing up, and so, like, I know what you're talking about. Like, to be completely, like, yes, they, hear somebody playing on the Opry stage all by themselves, but they're literally in a room by themselves. Like, it's just not, I mean, there's something that's lost, but it's something that's lost with
It's hard.
all interaction if it's not authentic, right? Like, we need authentic connection with people. What makes us come
Mm,
alive? And what makes us come alive is not by accident. Our story is going to tell us why. It's going to tell us why. It's going to tell us why we needed music, why we needed art, why we needed books, or linear thinking, whatever it might be, why we need to create or build or any of those, or save lives, or whatever it might be. There is a reason for that. And a lot of those reasons are mixed with stories of pain and heartache. But that is how we bless those stories, is that we acknowledge that they happen, we name them, we say, this is what hurt me, but now look what I've done with it. And that is what Fred did too. Fred Rogers had insecure attachment, and yet he made sure that other children knew how to gain secure attachment. So I became really good friends with David Newell, who played Mr. McFeely, the speedy delivery guy on Mr. Rogers. And so I was able to look him in the face
mhm,
and say,
mhm.
um, every time that Fred looked into the camera, he was healing the brains of children. He was right the whole time, David, the whole time. And to say to a man who has invested 50 years of his life to something, you are right, was a really wonderful honor for me because, um, I mean, think about that. Like, Fred was doing it before they could prove it. He was doing it intrinsically. He was doing it because he believed that it was what God wanted him to do. He believed that
Yeah, just
children,
felt it.
yes, and children deserved it. They deserved to have TV where people weren't putting pies in people's faces, and they weren't always slapsticking everything, but they want that they mattered. Like, when your goldfish dies, it matters. When, and like, I try to get people to understand this with their children.
Yeah.
Like, if grandma dies over the weekend or your dog dies, it's a big deal. Like, and they'll be like, oh yeah. Like, people are so ridiculously clueless when it comes to what affects their children. You're yelling at them all the way to school, and then they come to school and they get in a fight with somebody. It's not like really like rocket science, but people are like, I don't know why they're acting like that. And like, it's so funny to me that,
Yeah.
like, all of it matters. The
It's
way
like a
you say
disconnect.
goodbye to your, yeah, like how you say goodbye to your child. Did you snuggle them? Did you forget to snuggle them? Like,
Well,
did you,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, all of it matters. Everything matters. It's all worth talking about.
Well, a lot of people, they don't understand. Well, like you said, a lot of people think kids, like whatever you say to them is just gonna roll off, and a
No, it
lot of people
sticks.
feel that words don't matter, right?
Ugh,
So there's
they
some people
do.
they just they say words, they're very like insensitive, and they don't understand the impact of words. The words you say to that 5, 6 year old kid are still in their head when they're at their therapist, when they're 45 at their therapist,
They
or
are. They
they're
are.
drinking because of what you told them, or they're in
Yes,
a codependent relationship because they saw you and you didn't understand like what you do in front of your
they're
children,
watching
what you
you.
say in front of it. They
They're
pick it
watching
up.
it.
It's like you can tell them
Yes,
don't pick it up, but just because you say not to pick it up means that doesn't mean they're not going to pick it up.
I know, and it's so painful. It's so painful because when I see people doing evil, horrible things, I just think, "My God, they're just so broken." When we were like, "I don't understand why someone would do that." You're like, "Well," and then people are like, "Well, they can't just blame it on their childhood." Well, it is a big deal. Like, when I'm at the beginning of
It's a
it,
part of it.
and
It is.
yeah, like, when I have seen a child, I have taken your children, America, like, I have taken them into my classroom after you have been a total jerk, after you've been totally selfish, or you've put your new girlfriend or boyfriend over your child, or you've spent more time with your girlfriend or boyfriend's kids than your own child, or you haven't kept your word. I am the person who cares for them. I am the person who tries to help them understand why you aren't coming back. Like, teachers are doing
Mhm.
your job. We are doing the jobs of parents because people don't know how to parent because they weren't parented. So we have to decide as a society that we want to be well, that we're tired of all of this, that we're tired of constantly passing on generational trauma because all the things that we don't heal just keep happening, don't they? It's the reason all these things keep happening in these families over and over. Why? Well, this is so crazy. Why can't, it seems like everybody in our family is an alcoholic. Well, it's like or everybody in our
'Cause they're
family
not.
ends up divorced. Like, it's things like that where it's like sometimes I feel like we just make everything too complex. And I just, as I did my own research but my own healing, I was like, oh my God, that's our first heartbreak. When we are with our mother and we know as babies that she's supposed to be ours. Like, when I cry, she's supposed to help me. And when she comes in and barely meets my need, or she comes in and sometimes meets my need, or she comes in and terrorizes me, that is changing my brain. It's literally rewiring my brain
Mhm.
to look at the world in a completely new way. And it's not that child's fault. But now, as we grow up and we are a 45-year-old, it's time for us to heal it. We can't go back and just say, well, mom, you did this to me. So now you screwed me up forever. We get a choice to heal it, to engage it. And it's not fun. Brene
Yeah,
Brown
you get
always
a
says,
chance
stop
to.
working your shit out on other people, right? So, like, you have to
Yeah,
decide, stop working that out on me. And so I also was tired of watching teachers like losing their crap on kids and being like, oh, that kid is so bad. And then I'm thinking to myself, I think that kid is triggering you. I think that kid is a gift.
mm,
That kid that you can't stand, that blue-eyed boy that makes you stay up late and cry and get on my knees and pray and be like, God, show me how to love this kid. How? And so my prayer became, which is crazy because later when I read Fred's stuff, he would do the same thing. Let me be love. Like, just let me be love. Let me be the one person that doesn't give up on this child. Right. And I just feel like that is now how we can be radical. Before it was just talking about it. Now we have to actually do it again. We've gotten really out of the habit of being love to people and not loving them because we just put up with crap, but telling them, you know what, you have infinite value to this world around you, right? But teachers are tired. We're tired of doing all the heavy lifting because people are like, well, she works with kids. I'm sure she knows what she's doing. Yeah, but we got to make sure the doctors are healthy. Like, would you want to go in and get it treated by a physician that was full of boils and, like, you'd be like, but we're like that on the inside,
mm,
right? So it's a matter of doing the work that we need to do to reach the
yeah.
children that we can reach, but also the people that we love the most, right? But we can always, the good news is we can repair attachment, but we can also repair relationships. We can always go back and say, like with my own kids, I was like, dude, I botched it so bad. And getting my kids to be able to say, yeah, you did. And it's okay to tell me that now and receive it and hold that, but not take it on as like, swallowing it, eating it. Like, oh, I'm a horrible person. But it's more just like acknowledging I own that. I own that I failed there. And now I'm going to try my best to do better next time. And that's all my children needed. Forgiveness came when they know that we are truly repentant. We are so very sorry that and just saying it's my fault. I screwed it up, right? So there's abundant amount of hope in the fact that it is repairable. It's all repairable. It might not always be like we can go back to the beginning, but we can start again. And so that's my hope, is that people would just feel really infinitely loved and seen as they read this. It's yeah, it's a kind of a catalog of all the ways I screwed up as a mother, but but it's also the ways that love changed this little boy and has continued to foster change in my own life, but also the lives of the children I teach. So for like 4 straight years, we have not missed the neighborhood one day. 180 days, 4 years in order. So Mr. McFeely was like, I don't even think, like, I was there. He goes, I don't know if anybody's ever really done that, Wisty, but so he gives us like speedy deliveries on the 100th day of school because it's the 100th day in the neighborhood. But you know what? It's doable. It's just being intentional. Like, it's a non-negotiable part of our day. So if we don't get to something else, I'm like, that's just the way it is, because children need to know that they're well. Like, they need that more than anything, right? Like, how's your heart doing? So yeah, that's kind of the basis of this whole thing.
But well, I think the Mister Rogers was a big part of my childhood, and I think it is
Yeah.
missing today in the media. It's out there for children
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
don't get that feeling with somebody, like, he's saying he is love, and he's actually doing it. He's not like misrepresenting it. He's actually believes it, and he's doing it. And I
Right.
remember, seeing that show as a kid in the '70s, and at first I thought it was corny, right? But
Right.
then
Mhm.
I kept on watching it, and I
Yeah.
remember, and
You
I
believed
had
him.
2 other brothers, and we were like, "This is actually pretty cool." And
Yeah.
we're kids, and we could judge what was cool and not cool, and we continued to watch it, not because our parents told us to. We were really into it, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it was because when you really pay attention to that show, you would really focus, and you're like,
Mhm.
wow, like, I'm actually in it, and it really made
I'm in
me
it.
feel good.
Mhm.
And I think there's not
Yeah.
a lot of things today that can do that the way he did that. And so that's a lesson for anybody who wants to try to recreate that, is that they kind of look at what he did and read your book
Yeah, and there's been
and
a
look
lot of people that have,
at what.
yeah, that have mirrored some of his stuff. And the biggest thing that we talked about, embracing the pause, and we've also, it doesn't need to be complex to engage the heart of a child. And the less complex we make it, the more beautiful it is. So the less I did in the classroom, the more depth we had. So I didn't need a special program. I just needed to show them Fred and we talked about it. Or like I would just say some of the lyrics to a song, like, oh, what do we need to do? Look, look, look. And they're like, listen. Yeah, listen. Like,
Mhm.
and that was it. Like, they would remember it. And so I think that we need to ask ourselves where we are making things way too complex in our own lives
Yeah.
and in the lives of our children. They do not need everything they ask for. And Fred even says, you do not need everything you want. Mom and dad do not have the money to do that for you, and you
Yeah,
do
you gotta
not need it.
declutter.
Right. And then just in
De
general, like,
de Declutter
yeah.
and simplify,
Well, but
so many
emotionally too.
things are like, if
Yeah,
people are it's hard to do that,
it is. But it's a challenge, right? And we
but we
can do it.
but yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. I
So
mean, we have yeah, the only thing I said, we actually have hit our hour mark,
yeah, I know, I
and
saw
it's
that.
gone by very quickly. It doesn't seem like it,
Right. But
but,
definitely,
I want people to check out your website again.
yes. And we have a 60-second free quiz. Go ahead and take that. And then after you take that, they're going to give you an opt-in where you can actually get Waiting for Mr. Rogers. Here it is. For the cost of just shipping and handling. So get the book for free. And it releases, that'll be early. It releases to the public on the 26th of September. And then you'll also be able to opt in for the companion course that's going to be launching here pretty soon as well for like $27 versus like 250 or whatever. So there's lots of opportunities as well as great free resources to learn more about your attachment style. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you for this awesome conversation.
Oh, it's been great. I think it's been a interesting read on Mr. Rogers, and you know, being a child of the '70s, he always brought up really good memories for me. In
Good.
terms of like my childhood, one of the things that's like core is
Yes.
actually watching that show. And I
Yes.
think
Well,
kids
you
who
need to
have
go
not
watch it
seen
again
that,
now.
or people who haven't read about him, they
Yeah.
need to check out your book. Check
Thank
out your
you.
book and then go
Yes.
back into it and start looking
And
at
if,
the lessons you can
yeah.
learn from the past, because not everything, you know, from the future is, sometimes you have to go back a little bit and find the little nuggets.
Mm,
And definitely this is a golden nugget from the past that people need to go back and revisit.
yes. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right.